Another interesting design concept here that you might make use of is the multi-region high availability model. This is often used for disaster recovery, but you can definitely use it for high availability in multiple regions. So let's take this reference architecture, for example. We've got a primary region, we've got a secondary region, we've got some web servers running on Azure virtual machines in each region, we've got Azure SQL, and we basically got a copy of the database in that secondary region. And notice here on the left-hand side, users can go to globalmantics.com and that'll route connections to the Azure Traffic Manager. And again, the Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS-based load balancing solution. So you would simply go into the Azure portal, build a Traffic Manager resource, and you would have an endpoint that you could point your DNS entries to. So you might have something like contoso.trafficmanager.net, and then you could send your DNS entries or resolve your DNS entries or alias your DNS entries to that namespace. And so when users go to your domain, you can route connections to the appropriate place. So the Traffic Manager has all kinds of different routing capabilities. You can do priority routing. And that basically means people are going to go to like a primary region like we see here, or you can do something like performance-based routing where the users get routed to the closest location to them. But ultimately, it's very similar to what we were just looking at with the Azure Load Balancer. The Traffic Manager can do health checks, and if it determines that the infrastructure is not healthy, it's not going to send anybody over there. So for example, let's say that we set up these web servers. The backend SQL Server implementation is an Azure SQL database. The primary database is currently running in the primary region. So when users go to the web server talks to that primary database. Now we know we can set up failover groups in Azure SQL and have automated failover. So if the primary region actually fails, the Traffic Manager can figure that out. It can start routing users over to the web server in the secondary region. And since this is DNS based, there's nothing you have to do on your end. This can happen automatically. And then we can have a primary database failover and activate that database in the secondary region. So that's really the idea. And it's really not that hard to set up a Traffic Manager because really, again, it's just a DNS load balancing solution. But let's jump into the portal. I want to point out a couple of things here that you want to think about when you're designing multi-region high availability architectures. So here in the portal, if you were setting up the Traffic Manager, what you would do is go to create a resource. And then you could search for Traffic Manager in here, Traffic Manager profile. And when you create this, you would give this thing a name, like something unique under trafficmanager.net. And then you could alias your own domain to this namespace. And then here's your routing mechanisms. And there's a bunch of different ones available for you. But once you build this piece of infrastructure, this resource, you would go in, set up your endpoints. Your endpoints obviously can be Azure resources, but they could be resources in your own data center as well, your own public IP addresses in your own data centers. But it's very simple and easy to set up. Now, if you want to see me actually go and configure this and set all this up, check out this course here, Designing a Disaster Recovery Strategy on Microsoft Azure. We take a look at the concept of using a primary and a secondary region and failing over to the secondary region, but it'll give you a good idea about how the Traffic Manager works. So in this course, you can scroll down, go to the section on Deployment Topologies for Disaster Recovery, and check out this video here, Design Considerations for Azure Traffic Manager. And before we wrap this video up, I want to show you one last thing in the portal. If we go to Resource Groups, get out of that, head over to our Web Servers Resource Group, go into this virtual network here. We do have this option for peerings under the settings screen here. And so peerings are something that allow you to connect two different virtual networks. And Azure does support something called global VNet peering. So if you need internal connectivity between two different virtual networks in two different regions, you can come in here and add a peering relationship between those two different virtual networks. So this is a really cool way to connect two virtual networks without a VPN tunnel that are in two different Azure regions. And it's very simple to set up. You just pick the destination network. I don't have one here, so there's nothing showing up, but that's basically the idea. So keep that in mind as you're designing your highly available architectures, especially in those scenarios where you're using multiple regions. Next up, let's cover a few more common design patterns for high availability, especially when we were thinking about networking.